Guys, I'd like to welcome you back. You've done 340 shiurim on the Gemara of Bava Kamma, so well done to all of you. Rabbi Cohen spoke to us on Saturday night, addressing the group, obviously congratulating all of you for your achievement. And I'd like to just say that we never had a shiur this latter part of last week because of previous meetings that we all had. So on Thursday night was the Yahrzeit of my late uncle, my dad's brother, Sidney Costa, on the 29th of Cheshvan. So I want to do the shiur in dedication to my dad's brother. And what we're going to do as a standard format is start out with from Rav Meir, from Kevin. We're going to start off with a few halachas. And then we're going to go straight to the Mishnah and then the Gemara. Kevin, will you teach us some of the halachas?
Okay.
Oh, before we start, I want to share a picture of my dad's brother because I think that would give you an insight just in terms of his personality. So that was my dad's brother. You all know my dad. Yeah. So very cool guy. Very.
Yeah, look the same actually. They look different.
Yeah. So they had. I remember growing up. You've always got very fond memories growing up before life gets complicated and we get older and we get bogged down with responsibility. But I was very fond of my late uncle. And Arthur, thank you for editing the picture. Kevin, teach us the halachas.
Okay, so it is a positive commandment to give the wages of a hired man on the same day. It says here in Devarim, on his day you shall give him his hire. To a resident stranger who undertook to observe the 7 commandments imposed on all descendants of Noah, this law also applies. That on his day you shall give him his hire. That means on the day that he works, he must be paid at the end of that day. It is in effect everywhere and always for both men and women. Okay, there's another one here. This is actually interesting and it's completely different to that one. And it is a positive commandment to return whatever one has taken in robbery. And it says in Vayikra chapter 5, verse 23, he shall restore what he took by robbery. And it says, if a person seizes by robbery something worth a pruta, which is a small coin, which of a very, very small value, and upwards, he is to return it to the robbed person. If the robbed man has died, he is to return the seized object to the heirs. If the seized object is lost, he is to give its value in money. Included in this commandment, there is also the duty of returning anything gained by theft or swindle. It applies in every place and time for both man and woman. Okay, I think that's...
Thanks. Thank you very much. So, Kevin, thanks. Those were very two important halachas. In other words, treat people the way you want to be treated. If you don't want to be robbed, or even on a similar note, you want to be paid on time for your salary, pay others their salary on time. If you're expecting loyalty and hard work, don't mess them around for money. Same thing with suppliers or anybody you owe money to within reason. So, Kevin, thank you very much. I'm going to start by sharing the screen. We've entered into the 6th chapter, and then we're going to go from this point. You guys just give me a fraction of a second. I'll share my screen now. Okay. So, I tell you what, I would like, we on Bava Kamma chapter 6. I wanted to know, Arthur, could you read it? I've got another Mishnah for Gavin to read just now, by the way.
Screens have changed. Okay. Mishnah. The Mishnah defines, this is chapter 6. The Mishnah defines the degree to which one must supervise his sheep to prevent it from damaging another's properties. One who brought a sheep into a fold and locked the gate before it properly, but it escaped and damaged the property of another, he is not liable to pay for the damage. If, however, he did not lock the gate before it properly, and it escaped and damaged, he is liable to pay. If the fold, was breached at night, or robbers breached it, and the sheep escaped and damaged, he is not liable. But if the robber took it out, the robbers are liable. If he left the sheep in the sun, and it gave over gave it over to a deaf mute, or a deranged person, or a minor, and it escaped and damaged, the owner is liable. But if he gave it over to a shepherd, the shepherd assumes the responsibility for the animal in his place. If it fell into a garden and benefited from the produce there, and the owner pays for what it benefited. But if it went down to the garden in its usual manner and damaged there, the owner pays for what is damaged. The Mishnah cites a dispute as to how such damages are assessed. How does the owner pay for what it damaged? We appraise how much base seah in the field was worth before it was damaged, and how much it is worth now. The animal's owner must pay the difference. If it ate ripe produce, he pays the value of the ripe produce. Thus, if the volume is consumed, produce was a seah, he pays for a seah. If 2 seahs, he pays for 2 seahs.
Okay, perfect, Art. So I just want to go through a couple of things quickly. Is the rules of Bava Kamma. I'm just informing those that are listening to the show that haven't been part of it, is dealing with issues of damages, basically. And obviously the examples used in the Mishnah were agricultural nature, because at the times of the Gemara, we were in an agrarian culture. You know, it wasn't the Industrial Revolution. People made their money off breeding animals and animal husbandry, forestry, plantations, crops and seedlings and wineries, etc. So most of the halachas that we derive are from those examples on a pre-technology culture. However, the application of the halacha is brought exactly the same way today. So in other words, if you're on a highway and somebody's negligent and they hit your bakkie, they're obligated to pay. In terms of the circumstances, are there witnesses? Did you stop suddenly? Was your vehicle roadworthy? It was theirs roadworthy, etc. So just your standard principles replay itself. So in this particular Mishnah, I just want to clear up a couple of terms. One who brought a sheep into a fold. Now, a fold then was a temporary structure that you'd put up. It was pretty solid. But what would happen is that you would contain the sheep in the evening so that the manure that and they'd be there for some portion of the day, that their manure would be contained and almost... Okay, one point I just want to bring in is what the discussion is between if it fell into the garden and benefited from the produce there, the owner pays for what it had benefited. But if it went down to the garden in its usual manner and damaged there, the owner pays for what it damaged. If you remember from the previous Gemaras before, we learned that the benefited amount is different when there's no negligence. What does that mean? Is that if you had your, like in Harnof, you've got your public area on the top, and it's a mountain where you've got different layers. So if the animal fell from the public domain into a private domain, you pay for the benefit. Now, the benefit is determined at what either saved the animal's life from the impact of the fall, so what it would have cost you to have created some sort of impact protection. That's the equivalent of what you pay the owner, or what it benefited if that it fell safely but it ate. So you would pay for the equivalent of low-cost animal fodder. But you're not paying the same in terms of your negligence. So if it went down to the garden in its usual manner, meaning you never looked after it and it damaged there, the owner pays for what it's damaged. The damaged rate is calculated as something different. When we appraise a base seah, we say, look, we're not determining what that damage was if you had to sell it in the open market as almost ripened produce, because that would cost quite a lot in terms of damages. So what we say is how much of that area of that field was damaged overall compared to the full context of a sale of a field. So if, for example, it might have damaged 2 or 3 square meters and your field was a hectare, you only look at what it would have affected the entire selling of the field in terms of its worth, and you pay the difference. That's all you do. But Rabbi Shimon doesn't agree. He said if you created that damage, if the produce was ripe, then you would pay the value of the ripe produce that you damaged, even for that small area, which is the retail value of what you would sell it for in the market. So you're not looking at it in the broader context of the whole field that was damaged. Okay? All right. So now I'm going to go into the Gemara itself, just discuss some of the issues. Now, we're learning an issue about what is this concept of should it escape. In other words, the Mishnah taught that one who locks the gate properly is exempt for any damages animal causes should it escape. So the Gemara wants to define this term properly. So the rabbis taught in a brisa what is properly and what is improperly. A gate that can stand in a normal wind, that is guarding properly. Okay? Because it means a gate that is able to withstand a usual wind refers to a level of guarding under which an animal remains secure in normal common circumstances. But that is considered a lesser level of guarding. What do we mean lesser? It's not taking it's not taking every level of guarding into the equation. In other words, it still suffices because a gate that can't withstand a normal wind, that's an improper guarding. But even when you guard it properly, there's something known as a lesser guarding and a greater guarding. So what does that mean? Is that basically we learned in the 45th daf, I don't know if you remember that a shmira bachuta, which is a lesser guarding, it's the standard way in which people watch their animals or other hazards. So it suffices to prevent it from causing damage in ordinary expected situations, like an ordinary wind, etc. But it's not the same as a shmira ma'ula, which is a superior guarding. So that prevents damage even in unusual circumstances, where you're guarding the hazard in a way that can even, contain it against the animal abuse. So if an animal's trying to get out, it's obviously seen as far more damaging than a gale force wind because it's got continual impact against the gate or the door and the lock. So that's considered a superior guarding. So we say, although you can't be accused of negligence if you guard in a lesser manner, in other words, to take into account usual circumstance of weather, etc., a superior guarding is needed in certain cases to exempt from liability. Can any of you guys remember what that would include? Guys?
What other types of liability? What other types?
No. I'm saying, for example, if an animal is generally calm, then a lesser guarding would suffice. But if an animal is known to be pre-warned as an aggressive animal, then not all Rabbonim consider a lesser guarding, which is considered the average guarding, suffice to negate liability. Okay, so it emerges from our Mishnah that only the lesser level of guarding is generally required. Rav Mani Bar Patish said, which Tana maintains that a lesser guarding suffices for a muat? It's Rav Yehuda, as we learned in the Mishnah in 45a. And what I want to do is I actually want to share that Mishnah with you guys so that we don't have to go down memory lane without you reading it. Gavin, I don't know if you want to read it.
If a person measures to prevent his animal from doing damage, but nevertheless damages, he is exempt from liability. The Mishnah discusses the level of prevention necessary to qualify for this exemption. If its owner tied the ox with a rein or locked the gate before its property, but it went out and damaged, whether it is tam or a muad. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Huda says, if it's a tam, the owner is indeed liable, as you say. If it's muad, he's exempt. Because it is stated regarding a muad and its owner did not guard it, whereas the one was guarded. Rabbi Eliezer says, the muad has no means of guarding except the knife.
Okay, so you've got three opinions here. There's actually four opinions in this Mishnah, but let's just go with the three major ones. The words of Rabbi Meir seem to say that whether it's a tam or muad, you basically need a superior level of guarding. Okay? Rav Yehuda is saying that if it's a tame animal, you need a superior level of guarding. But if it's a muad, a habitually warned animal, a lesser guarding is exempt. Okay? And Rav Eliezer said, look, there's no means of guarding it except the knife. What does he mean? Is that whether it's a tam or a muad, even if you do a superior guarding, if your animal has created damage, even if you took every precaution, the reality is somebody wants compensation for the damage your animal caused, and therefore you have to pay. So he's the most stringent out of all of the opinions. Rabbi Meir is the second most stringent because he holds liability for both tam and muad in terms of superior guarding. And Rav Yehuda says only a tam requires superior guarding, but a muad requires less of a guarding. So what does Rav Eliezer mean when it has no means of guarding except the knife? He's saying basically if you want to make sure you never have to fork out money to pay for your animal damaging, doesn't matter the amount of protection you give, the person's going to want their damages paid and they're entitled to it. You have to shech the animal to prevent that sort of damage. So if you know your animal has got a habitual nature of goring and you've got you haven't got it locked up in Alcatraz, I'd suggest you shecht it. That's his opinion. Okay. Now, there was a fourth opinion, incidentally, from that particular Gemara, if you remember learning, which was the confusing part. I think you guys remember. There was one of the Rebbonim called Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov. Okay. Now, Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov was the most lenient, and Rav Eliezer was the most stringent. So Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov is a different rabbi that was taught in a brisa, and he said that whether the ox that gored was a tam or muad, if its owner guarded it with a lesser guarding, he is exempt. And what was his reason? He concurs with Rav Yehuda, who says that for a muad, a lesser guarding suffices, and he expounded the Gezerah Shava, comparing the goring of a tam to the goring of the muad. So those are your four opinions. Now, before we discuss in this current Gemara what we're dealing with here, the reason I've decided to show you where it's written in the 45th daf is you might ask a simple question. You might say, how's it that we can define a muad with a lesser guarding? So just to put everybody in the picture, the people at this year know is that a tam is considered a tame animal, meaning it's got a generally docile nature, and a muad means forewarned, meaning it's created at least 3 times it had been warned of its behavioral patterns to damage, and on the 4th time it's rendered muad, which means it's known as a classically dangerous animal. And a classically dangerous animal is liability for full payment from choice property. What does choice property mean? Choice property or cash is an equivalent. Tam is a tame animal, which means that for the first 3 offenses, you kind of let off the hook by only making half payment from the body of the attacking animal, which is 2 leniencies. If the attacking animal, in other words, your ox that attacked another animal was a puny animal, you would get off by only paying half the damages to the value of your attacking animal. So you get the leniency if your animal is small, as well as half payment damages. So the problem arises very straightforwardly that how could Rabbi Yehuda suggest that for a habitually dangerous animal or pre-warned animal, that there be a lesser guarding, and that for a relatively tame animal, you need a superior guarding. Because why should he say that a lesser guarding suffices for a aggressive animal, and yet for a tame animal, you are liable unless you've done a superior guarding? And a superior guarding means taken extraordinary precautions. That seems completely counter-logical to the issue at hand. Do you remember any of the suggestions given and how he learned it? I'm just testing you guys.
Look, we did it a couple ago as well. We covered it in the brief as well. So I can't remember the exact.
Yeah.
The thing with the word is very tricky because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense at all. But there is something on it. I'm feeling great.
That's the stuff. I thought about it here because it's. I wanted to ask you that question. How come a word is less of a guarding than a tongue? And then we obviously did it, but I can't remember. Okay. It doesn't make sense in a way.
Correct. So I want to just go back to the 45th daf, cover it for at least another 10 minutes we've got left, because it doesn't help to go forward unless you've understood the logic.
Absolutely.
So basically, there's a verse in Exodus saying that that you have to. I'll put it to you like this. Let me see if I can bring it across in the most simple way. Is that the first thing that you've got to understand about Rav Yehuda is that Rav Yehuda is different to some of the other rabbis. The other rabbis say, look, there's two different types of payment. Either you pay half payment damages from the body of the attacking animal, and those are your T leniencies, especially if it's a scrawny animal that attacks. And with Muad, you pay full payment damages from choice property, meaning you don't get the leniency of the attacking animal. What do we mean is that the attacking animal, if you created 200 zuz worth of damage to another ox that's lying dead, then you're paying half payment damages of 100 zuz. But if your attacking ox is only worth 80 zuz, you give him your attacking ox, and then you've made restitution on the damages. But if it's muad, you have to pay the full 200 zuz from choice property or cash equivalent. So the issue is that all the rabbis hold that muad, the full amount is made from choice property. You must remember that Rabbi Yehuda is saying that the muad, only the balance is paid with choice property. The first is paid from the value of the gufa of the attacking animal. So in other words, if the dead animal is worth 200 zuz and the attacking animal is worth 80 zuz, then what happens is he gives the attacking animal in lieu of the first part of the payment, and he makes restitution of cash of 120 zuz or property. So in other words, Rav Yehuda is the only one that holds that the muad payment is the tam portion of the attacking animal plus the extra in cash or property to make up for the shortfall. So he's not saying, for example, that you don't pay at all for a lesser guarding, because we could never think that for a lesser, in other words, you could never come off with a lighter sentence for an animal where you were habitually warned compared to an animal that's tame. In other words, if a superior guarding is required by the Torah for a tam animal that does damage, you then you can't think now that if you've done a lesser guarding for a muad that you don't have to pay at all. It would never be logical that. All he's saying is that, Rav Yehuda, is that you don't pay the muad portion, but you still pay the tam portion. Meaning you're the same way off that you were when you paid the tam portion. You still pay, in other words, if you did not do a superior guarding, and your animal was muad, you still have to pay the tam portion. The only thing you don't have to pay for the lesser guarding is the muad portion. But you certainly don't pay less than you would for tam damage. You don't get off better off, especially since you were pre-warned. Does that make sense? So that's the first principle that you've got to bear in mind. And how do we know this principle? It was brought forward by Rav Ada bar Ahava. Okay. He said, look, it's counterlogical, he asserts, to say that when a person's animal becomes a muad, he's better off than when it was still a tam, and is exempt from paying even half damages in cases which he guarded with a lesser guarding. That's according to Tosfot. Surely, therefore, Rav Yehuda means that a lesser guarding exempts the owner only from the extra muad portion of the damages. He's still liable, however, for the tam portion. Does that make sense, guys? That should already clear it up for you to a certain extent. So we want to know that how does he learn it even? So just to see firstly Rav Meir's reasoning, because Rav Meir said basically whether it's a tam or muad, the owner is liable, and it has to be a superior guarding. Okay. He holds that ordinary oxen are not in a guarded state. In other words, the average person does not guard his ox at all, but rather allows it to roam about unrestrained. And under such conditions, the merciful one said that a tam is liable for damages, which implies that a tam requires a lesser level of guarding. So what he's saying is there, look, the Torah meant to hold the Torah means to hold the owner liable for acting as average ox owners do. So the Torah says that basically the owner has to do then more than average owners who don't watch their animals at all. And therefore he must guard his animal with a lesser guarding. Okay, at least that is the minimum. Does that make sense? So we've learned as far as that's concerned, that a tam requires a lesser guarding. So far we don't understand, because Rav Meir turns around and says, listen, there has to be a superior guarding for whether it's tam or muad. And here it's implying, but hang on a second, if he's saying that nobody generally looks after the oxen, and in comparison, if you provide a lesser guarding for a tam, that suffices, then how come he says even for a tam, a superior guarding is required as well as for muad? It's just seeming to contradict that in the Gemara. So the reason is, it says, the merciful one then said regarding a muad, and he did not guard it. That's from the pasuk. And when it said that in Exodus, Shmot chapter 21, verse 36, it basically implies that a muad requires a superior level of guarding. And Rav Meir expounds, he takes the Gezerah Shava, comparing the goring of a tam to the goring of a muad. So what do we mean that? Is that when he took the Gezerah Shava, in other words, he compares the tam to a muad, which needs a superior guarding in order to be exempt, he says now, this means that you need a superior guarding for a tam as well, that there's absolutely no difference as far as that's concerned. That's how he learns the Gezerah Shava. So he's relatively stringent, that says a superior guarding is required both for a tam and a muad with regards to the Gezerah Shava. But how is he less than Rav Eliezer? Because Rav Eliezer said, listen, it doesn't matter even if your guarding is superior and you've got Fort Knox. If the animal does damage, you have to pay. Whereas Rabbi Meir says, no. If you've got an enclosure that can withstand an abnormal wind, an animal kicking, and somebody breaches it or something goes wrong and there's a mishap, you're off the hook. But for a lesser guarding, it doesn't suffice even for a tam, because of the Gezerah Shava that we learn that you have to have a muad, a superior guarding even for a muad. So now we are very confused as far as Rabbi Yehuda is concerned, why I would say, hang on a second, but for a muad, a lesser guarding is required, and a tam, a superior guarding, because it's counterintuitive to not only the logic, but to the Gezerah Shava, the way Rabbi Meir learns us. So the Gemara explains the reasoning. Rabbi Yehuda holds that the ordinary oxen are in a guarded state. In other words, people generally watch their oxen with a lesser guarding. And under such conditions, the merciful one that it says that a tam pays damages, which implies that a tam requires a superior level of guarding. He said the merciful one then said he did not guard it regarding a muad, implying that a muad requires a superior level of guarding. So what he's saying is that there's we learn from an exegesis. Remember on page 39 of the Siddur from Rav Meiri, that if you have an amplification, often earlier amplification, it's actually understood to be a limitation. So in other words, he's saying, look, as far as the tam portion, there's a superior guarding, but because there was a double negative word, it means that you can learn for a muad, you can have a lesser guarding. Remember what we mean by a double negative.